Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles. I'm out here in a local park near my house, and today I thought I'd shoot a video for you guys on the gear that you might want to have while you're out foraging, and I'd also thought I'd go over some of the gear that I like to carry whenever I go out foraging. Okay, you can see I have some things laid out here on the table, and these are the items that I usually carry whenever I'm out foraging. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each one of these items one by one, and we're going to talk a little bit about why I use them, and we're going to talk about some things that you might want to think of whenever you're looking for gear for yourself whenever you go out foraging. Alright, here on this side, some of the things that I usually carry. I usually always carry a good 50 to 75 foot hank of paracord. The reason for that is I find that gives me just enough length for if I need to make an impromptu shelter, just in case something happens, I can do that with this. So that's really the main reason I carry it. Another good reason for carrying this is if you really need to tie something up, maybe you need to bandage your arm, you can do that with this if there's nothing else available. You can take this apart, you can sew with it, you can fish with it. There are all kinds of survival uses to paracord, and this is really what I carry this for, is just in case something happens. So that's one thing that you really might want to think about for your foraging kit, is make sure you have excess cordage or extra cordage available just in case you need it. And again, on that same token of extra cordage, I have a couple pairs of shoestrings here, just some old shoestrings from some old shoes that I've never used these shoestrings. And a good reason for having these is I don't have to use my paracord if I need to make a bow drill. I have these shoestrings that I can use instead. Again, following right along with the little survival kit. In your foraging kit or your foraging gear, it's really good idea to have a little bit of a survival kit in some way, shape, or form. Depending on where you're at, you may not need a lot of one. Like where I'm at and where I usually go, I don't usually need a big survival kit, you know, like a 3-day bag or anything. However, if you're out in the mountains and you are going out on an expedition, you certainly want to think about it. Besides that, following right in line with the survival kit, the next thing that I have is some waterproof and windproof matches. These are just a couple boxes of these little matches. These things are really nice. They have this extremely long tip on them, as you can see here. They burn really bright, they burn really hot, however they burn really fast. And that's another reason that I have two of them, is just in case. Alright, now the next thing that we have here is we have some cutting tools. Whenever it comes to cutting tools, 1 is none and 2 is 1. So, following in line with that, I have a Leatherman Blast. This is just a really nice Leatherman multi-tool. I've had this thing for years. I think I've had this thing for almost 8 years at this point now. I've used the living crap out of it. You know, it's got all kinds of useful stuff. You know, I've even had a little tip of this little thing break on me. Doesn't matter, I really use the knife and the saw and the pliers more than I do anything else. But something like this I have found to be really handy. Sometimes whenever there's a small stick that I need to gather, sometimes I want to gather a small limb off of a tree. I don't want to have to pull out my big folding saw for a green stick that's this big, when I can just pull out my Leatherman or my multi-tool and I can use this saw, which you can still see sawdust stuck up in it. That's how much I use this thing. I use this thing very frequently. And that's really the main thing that I use is this. And that's really the main thing that I use is the saw, because like I said, small twigs, small branches, those are best to be gathering inner bark from usually. And I don't want to have to whip out my folding saw. Another really good thing about having a multi-tool is just that in case something does happen in a survival situation, you also have a backup knife, so you have an extra cutting tool for smaller tasks. It also provides a smaller knife for fine carving tasks, which sometimes your other cutting tool may not do so well. Alright, so let's get into the next cutting tool that I usually carry. I usually carry a Mora of some kind. This is a stainless steel Mora companion, although I usually carry a high carbon steel. I bought the stainless steel version just because I really wanted to. I thought it'd be kind of nice for food preparation, though I've used it for some other things. It's got some char on it for me, kind of sanitizing it over the fire. But I use this blade more for cutting off leaves if I need to, or cutting up any food whenever I need to if I'm out and about foraging. Sometimes I'll bring like an extra onion or a pepper or something like that, or maybe a potato. Sometimes I'll cut it up and make a little fire and cook it. And this really helps with that more than anything else. However, if again, you get lost in a survival situation, you have a knife, you have a really good cutting tool, and these things are razor sharp when you buy them, so that's great. Extremely cheap and very durable. I absolutely love Moranais for their price. The next cutting tool that I usually carry is a folding saw. This is just a cheap little Coleman brand, not a sponsor, but this is just a cheap little Coleman $10 folding saw that I bought in the camping section of Walmart. Really nothing fancy, nothing special, just has a nice little lock mechanism. Now I've never had to use this for foraging exactly, however I use it whenever I go camping or whenever I go hiking. Another thing that's really good about having this is if you get lost, you have something to process bigger logs with for firewood, so you're not stuck trying to baton with a knife. And that's the main reason that I have this. And that really comprises the survival kit aspect for the most part of my foraging kit. When it comes to actual foraging gear, there are a couple things that you might want to think about. If you're going to be messing with berries, a lot of people really want to go for berries and sometimes nettles. They sting and or have thorns. If you want to prevent that, a good leather glove of some kind, excuse the sewing string. If you want to prevent the prick from the thorn or the burn from the nettle or the sting from the nettle, you really want to make sure you have a good leather glove, at least one, because one hand, if you're picking nettle greens, is going to be holding the nettle like this, and the other hand is going to be cutting with scissors or cutting with a knife. So that's one reason I only have one glove here. It also helps if you are It also really helps if you're going to pick berries, because you can grab a branch of berries and then you can hold it up and pick just with your other hand and not have to worry about picking berries with a leather glove, because that is very challenging. And a good way to dirty up your berries. So that's really the next main thing that I have here, and you can use really any glove that's protective of your hands. I find leather to be the best because it doesn't get damaged with thorns as easily as most other gloves. So that's something you may want to think about. Alright, and the next part of my foraging kit usually consists of a couple bags. Normally I have a couple more bags than this. Usually I have a couple Ziploc bags as well. The reason I like to carry Ziploc bags is just in case if I'm going out to forage any berries, I can put them in a Ziploc bag and I don't have to worry about the possibility of the berry juice leaking out and staining anything in my bag with something like this or a mesh bag like this. However, there are reasons that I like to use these kinds of plastic bags, and I'll get into that in just one second. But first, using my saw to hold my plastic bag down so it doesn't blow away. Alright, now first and foremost, the thing that you really want to think about when it comes to foraging is getting yourself a mesh bag. The reason for this is, A, whenever you're dealing with really large leaves, I find that a mesh bag works better than a plastic bag. The reason for that is this allows breathability for the plants, which in often cases helps keep the plants or the greens a lot fresher. Or if you're dealing with, let's say, clumps of wild onions or wild leeks or things of that sort, or a bunch of roots, a mesh bag I find to be a lot better than plastic, because plastic doesn't really breathe very well. However, plastic bags, in my opinion, do have their use. Another really good thing about mesh bags is whenever you're foraging mushrooms, the mesh bag allows the spores of the mushroom to fall out and be distributed by the wind and be carried by wind, which what that means is that's going to allow the possibility of more mushrooms to grow in the area that you've been walking. Doesn't mean they will. It does help the spores of the mushroom, or the pollen if you will, to spread. So that's a really good reason to carry a mesh bag. And you may notice that I have two different mesh bags here, and that's also for a good reason, mainly because if I lose one, I have a smaller one, or if I lose the small one, I have a big one. It doesn't really matter. This big white one that you see is actually just a big mesh dish bag. That's really all it was. It's mainly a dish dunk bag. However, it works great for mushrooms because you can fit a lot of mushrooms in it. This one is also really good for any of those smaller mushrooms. Maybe you're just going for morels or some chanterelles and you're just going for a small amount. If I was in a survival situation and I was hunting mushrooms, I wouldn't worry so much about this big white one. I would just carry this little bitty black one because it's small. It doesn't weigh near as much as this does, though they're both light as can be. I don't need to fill this up if I'm in a survival situation. So that's something else to keep in mind, and that's why I carry two mesh bags. Alright, now plastic bags. These things get a bad rap. And I mean that literally. Unfortunately, a lot of people are like, you use plastic, you're damaging the environment. And that very well may be true. However, my logic behind using plastic bags is I reuse these. Instead of throwing these in the trash right after I take my groceries out of them, I put them inside of a stuff sack that I have on the back of one of my doors. And I hold there's a car coming, and I hold all of the plastic bags in that bag until I can use them again. So I don't throw away plastic bags until they're completely unusable, and usually I go and recycle them anyways, because we thankfully now have a couple places nearby where I can do that. So whenever they become shredded to almost useless, I just recycle them. So I'm not damaging the environment. I am reusing these bags multiple times instead of just using them once for my groceries and throwing them in the trash. Another great thing about plastic bags is whenever you're dealing with things like nettle greens and you don't want the possibility of your bag swaying around and the green stinging you, like with a mesh bag, or maybe you're collecting other things that maybe you want to keep separate from your other food, you can put them in a mesh bag. Maybe if you have to worry about things leaching out, like if you're gathering a lot of dandelions or a lot of milkweed, you have a lot of that milky sap. Maybe you want to keep that milky sap off of things. Well, a mesh bag won't do that very well, and a cloth bag will stain, whereas a plastic bag will not stain. So that's a good reason for carrying a plastic bag or two, is just because of any milky latex or any saps or oils that bleed out of a plant. Maybe you grab a plant that you don't know how to identify. You can put it in a plastic bag and it's safe and protected away from all of your other food, so there's very little chance of cross-contamination. So that's something to keep in mind. So don't always give plastic bags the bad rap that they have. Alright, and the next thing that I always carry whenever I'm out foraging is 2 field guides. I carry one for medicinal plants and herbs, and I carry one for edible wild plants. And there's a good reason for that. I usually don't carry a mushroom field guide unless I know I'm actively going out to hunt mushrooms. Just because the mushroom field guide is very thick, very heavy, and I don't need to carry it 12 months of the year when I'm really only hunting mushrooms just a couple of those months out of the year overall. So I find it to be a waste of space and a waste of weight. However, you may be different. You may live in a part of the country where there's mushrooms all year round, and there are pretty much everywhere. However, I don't go out and hunt mushrooms a whole lot. One of the reasons I carry 2 field guides is obviously one covers a different use than the other, but another reason for that is I find that the Peterson Field Guide to Medicinal Plants has much better pictures, these are color photographs versus a line drawings like you get with the edible plant book. And a lot of the plants that are in this book, that are in the Edible Wild Plant Field Guide, are also in the Medicinal Plants and Herbs Field Guide. So that's something to keep in mind, is that a lot of plants are not only dual in nature, but one field guide won't necessarily cover you for all the uses, but one field guide can do most of the work for identification. And I found that to be the case because I don't use this very much anymore. I do use it to corroborate with this book to make sure that I have made a positive identification if it's a plant that I don't know. So that's something that you may want to think about as well, and it's extremely important that you do carry 2 field guides at the very least. One for medicinal plants and one for edible plants. If nothing else, maybe carry something for trees, carry something for maybe poisonous plants, and carry any other field guides that you feel you might need until you don't need them or don't want to carry them any longer. That's one of the best ways to learn plants. Alright, now one of the most important things in your foraging kit is going to be the bag itself. Now the bag size is going to vary depending on who you are and how much gear you actually need or have in your foraging kit. Now I usually like to carry a bag that's 3 to 4 times larger, so basically this bag has at least 4 times the amount of space than the space of the stuff in my kit already. And the reason for that is because plants take up a lot of space. So if I'm out and something does happen, I have plenty of room in this bag that I can put sticks, firewood, I can put, tinder, I can collect leaves, I can collect food, I can collect berries, nuts, and I have room to put those things in this bag. Now one thing that's really nice is to have multiple pockets. You want to make sure that you have multiple pockets if that's something that you really enjoy. I enjoy multiple pockets. If you don't, make sure you get a 1-pack rucksack. Again, bag type, brand, does not matter. You can use a day pack. Now this thing has pockets everywhere. It has little pouches. But I've been using this bag for the past 1.5 years or 2, and I have really enjoyed it. You can see some excess paracord in there. I've really enjoyed using it I have not had any issues with this bag so far with durability. It's held up to everything I've thrown at it. It holds everything I need to. It's extremely comfortable. It has multiple straps. It has slight molly capability on the bottom for me to attach extra things if need be. It's a great bag. However, don't get caught up on bag features and bag brand or bag size, because that really doesn't matter. There are often times when I go out with just a small day pack that's about this big. It may have one small pouch and that's it. So just a small day pack might work just perfectly fine for you. Now the next thing I always carry is a boken. The reason I carry a boken, and I've explained this in a couple other videos, is because I find that the curve of the boken helps me to move plants out of the way a lot more gently without bending or breaking the stem of the plant, because sometimes plants get really dried out during droughts or during dry times of the year. Another good reason for having a boken is snake protection, or any stick is snake protection or to move thorns. Morel hunters commonly use a stick so that way they can move debris, brush and grass and things so they can find their mushrooms or their morels, and that's another thing that I use this for. Now don't get caught up on having a boken. You can use any stick that you want. It really doesn't matter. Most people just pick a stick up off the ground when they walk in the woods, and you can do that too, and it works great. Alright, now the next most important thing in your foraging kit is going to be the footwear. There are a lot of choices for footwear that you can wear while you're out and about foraging. Most of that really just depends on where you're going to be at for the most part. However, I want to talk about a couple of things first and foremost, and one of those things is the differences between hiking shoes and boots and normal shoes. Whenever you're wearing hiking shoes, I usually wear hiking shoes usually only in rocky environments, and we don't have a lot of those where I live. There's a lot of rocks, but there's not a lot of rocky ground where I live, so I don't find myself wearing these a whole lot. However, they are really good. These are just a pair of Merrill ventilators. And these are really good because they dry out fast, they breathe really, really well, and they have superior grip. You can see this really crazy surface here, and this helps to provide great grip on a rocky surface. And the other thing I have out here is just some normal tennis shoes. These are actually a pair of Globe skate shoes. Now again, nothing in this video is a sponsor. However, I usually wear Globes all the time. I absolutely love Globe shoes. I've been wearing Globe shoes for over 10 years now, and I will not go to another shoe. That's personal preference. You can wear whatever shoe you want. But I usually like to encourage people to wear skateboarding shoes for a lot of hiking, and the main reason for that is, A, skate shoes are flat along the bottom. Another reason, skateboarding is extremely rough on shoes. It's one of the roughest things on shoes that I've ever seen in my life. I'll actually put a picture of the email down below from Globe, because I actually got these shoes sent to me by Globe in 2011. These shoes are 5 years old. I've worn them every day, almost every day, for the past 2.5 years. Mowed the yard with them, foraged, hiked, backpacked, camped, hunted, you name it. I wore these things in the middle of winter while I was hunting deer. These are the shoes that I wore while I deer hunt. I wear these things all the time. As you can see, they're worn out. They're well used. They've got a little bit of marks from my skateboard on them. But like I said, the main reason I encourage people to wear skateboarding shoes is because you will get thousands of miles out of a good quality skate shoe. Versus these, I haven't worn very much. I've only maybe worn them probably 20 or 30 times in the past 10 years that I've had them. Mainly just because I prefer skate shoes. So as far as durability, I don't know how well these hold up, but I don't hear too many people talking about getting thousands of miles out of their Merrells or most other shoes before they fall apart. I have done that with skate shoes. Alright, and lastly I want to talk about a couple extra things in your foraging kit that I didn't mention earlier because I don't always carry these two items. You can see I have a pair of scissors and a trowel here. Obviously a trowel is good for digging roots if you plan on digging any roots. Most of the time I'm out and about foraging, I don't do a lot of digging, so I don't carry a trowel a whole lot. I only carry it if I know I'm specifically going to forage roots. However, whenever I very first started, I had a folding trowel that I carried with me at all times, so that way I could dig up roots to help use the root for identification. And that's something you may be interested in, because there were a lot of plants in my area that looked like a wild onion or a wild leek that I at first confused with them, until I dug up the roots and I didn't smell any onion or any leek at all. So that's something that you may want to think about with the trowel. really any trowel is going to work. This is just, honestly, this is just a crappy trowel that I bought at a flea market for like 75 cents. It's got a cracked split handle, but it still works. It hasn't bent on me yet. It worked a lot better than the folding trowel that I had that bent rather quickly. But really, for a lot of different roots, most of the roots that you're going to be gathering when you're foraging, a trowel of this size is going to be perfect. You know, your normal gardening trowel, if you have one, will work just fine. So there's not much of a reason for you to buy an extra trowel unless you really, really want to. Another thing that I don't always carry is a pair of scissors. The reason for that is because oftentimes I don't need to. If I'm going to be collecting nettle greens, I'll usually carry a pair of scissors if I don't feel like using my Leatherman scissors. Another reason that I carry scissors is if I'm going out and I plan on collecting chickweed or plants that have a huge mass of plant material like chickweed. They grow in a big cluster and you have to snip a lot of greens or a lot of tips off. Scissors work really well for that. They also do work well for clipping off leaves if you only need a couple and you don't feel like pinching them with your fingers. A good thing about using scissors to do that is it doesn't damage the plant, though using your fingers doesn't really damage it a whole lot either. So that's personal preference, and that's another reason I wanted to mention scissors. Alright, and that pretty much covers the things that I usually carry whenever I go out foraging. So now what we're going to talk about is I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that you might want to add to your foraging kit. Alright, here you can see I have this really small, kind of canvas style bag. It's got a couple extra pockets on it. Nothing fancy, nothing large. This is actually called a foraging bag. I don't really like to use cloth bags for foraging. The main reason for that is cloth collects a lot of fur, collects a lot of hair, and that usually ends up on your plants whenever you get them home. I myself don't particularly care for that. You may be different, you may enjoy using cloth bags, and that's perfectly fine. The whole point is to use something that works for you. The main reason I wanted to talk about this bag was just because of A, its size. As you can see, it's very small, but it actually fits a lot of stuff. I can hold this trowel, these scissors, this compass, this mess kit, this flashlight, bandana, a small first aid kit, and a couple more things. So it can actually hold quite a bit of stuff in it. And of course, if you want to put stuff inside the mess kit, you totally could. So this bag holds a lot of things. And you really could hold a lot of greens or roots or plants that you have foraged in this bag. Another nice thing about it is it just slings over the shoulder with this strap here. So you don't have two straps to worry about, you don't have a whole lot to carry. So if you're just going out in your local park and foraging and you know what you're going for and you don't need a huge bag or you don't want to carry a huge bag, again, something of this size can get you through most of the things that you plan on foraging if you carry minimal tools in a minimal kit. Alright, now another thing you might really want to think about that's extremely important is a compass. The reason for that is foragers and hikers are the most common people to get lost whenever they're out in the woods or a backcountry environment or a wilderness style environment. Foragers and hikers are usually the ones who get lost the most. Reason for that is people who are out hiking oftentimes don't have a lot of experience. They're excited. They're not paying any attention where they're going. Foragers, on the other hand, are very excited, not paying attention to where we're going, but we're always looking at the ground instead of what's around us. That's even worse. The reason for that is because the ground from your eyes is only 5 to 6 feet. If you're looking out and around in front of you, you can see a lot more things, so you have a better chance of spotting your direction sooner rather than later if you are hiking. Now the reason you didn't see a compass in what I normally carry is because I have two other means of a compass. Well, actually technically three. Okay, the three different means that I have as a compass is A, the sun. First and foremost, the sun works for me the majority of the time. B, I have a phone that has a compass on it. C, if it dies, I usually have a watch of some kind that I can use as an impromptu compass. Now last night I watched a video by Really Big Monkey 1 where he talked about the uses of a compass, and he showed how just being off a few degrees can really put you off course, and how walking in the woods, though you think you're walking in a straight line to get around all of the trees and all the obstacles, you end up veering very, very far off course. And he's absolutely correct. That is 100% the case. And that's the reason why you need to understand navigational skills, whether it be earth navigation, sun navigation, land navigation, water navigation. You really have to have an understanding of navigation. And until you really, really feel comfortable and know that you're not going too far, until you know 100% on how to not get lost and know how to know where you are at all times, please carry a compass, people. This little piece of kit can save your life. Now this is just a normal engineer style lensatic compass. And the reason I like to use a lensatic compass is because it has this nice little eyeglass with this little line and this nice wire here that you can use to line up things off the horizon. So that's really helpful, and that's an extremely useful tool for helping to find your way, at least in my experience. So make sure that you have a compass in your kit if you're foraging in places that isn't your local city park or your yard. Oftentimes, people are just going to be collecting, grains from their yard or their local park. They're not going to be going out in the wilderness-style environment. But if you are, please carry a compass. Another thing you might want to think about for your foraging kit is a mess kit of some kind. The reason for that is you're foraging, you're collecting food, and if something happens and you do get lost, you have a way to prepare some of that and to boil some water. This is just a really old Boy Scout mess kit that I've had since I was a child. Now there's another piece of this, there's like a little metal plate thing, I guess, as well. I think that's what this is. But this is missing a little piece that I've never used. These are the three that I use the most. This I can boil and collect water in, I can drink out of, I can eat out of. This I can eat off of, I can use to prepare things, I can use to separate, I can use to store, I can use to make salves if I need to on the fly. I can use this to cook as well. So this comprises a lot of different uses for foraging, and that's extremely important because, like I said, if you're out foraging, maybe you're out and you've collected some food and then you go and get lost for a day or so, you have something to prepare some of that food with, so you have something in your stomach. So that's obviously another important thing to think about for your kit. Another thing that you really want to think about with your foraging kit is to make sure you at least have a couple Band-Aids and some gauze just in case something happens and you get cut. Whenever you're out foraging, sometimes you're dealing with berries that have thorns, sometimes you're dealing with roses, and again, they have thorns. You're walking in places where there's a lot of chance and probability for you to get a small cut. So having a way to keep that clean and to keep it protected so you don't end up with an infection is extremely important as well. Another really important thing to your foraging kit, or really any kit, in my personal opinion, is a bandana. The values of a bandana are absolutely endless in a survival situation. Not only can you cut off a small corner or a small piece of it because it's 100% cotton and you can make char cloth out of it, but you can also use it to filter water if need be. You can use this to keep yourself cooled off. You can use this to give yourself a little bit of shade. You can use this to collect food if you have nothing else. So there are a lot of different uses to a bandana in a survival situation or just for foraging in itself. And another extremely important thing that you might want to think about adding to your kit as well is a poncho or raincoat of some kind, because you never know when it's going to be raining. And again, a poncho has a whole lot of uses, especially a heavier duty one like this that's made out of some heavy duty kind of material and not that really thin, cheap plastic bag crap. With a poncho, you can not only keep the rain off of you, which is really nice to help keep you dry, in an impromptu situation, if nothing else, if you don't have a tarp, excuse me, the wind's blowing everywhere, if you don't carry a tarp, which is something you might want to think about too, you can use this to set up a quick shelter or an impromptu shelter if need be, especially if it's one of these fold-over kind. If you can, try to find a fold-out kind like this that has some grommet holes on it so it's easier to make a shelter with. However, it's not that big a deal. You can also use this as a ground cover if you do bring a tarp, so you don't need to carry two tarps, and you have something to give you a little bit of protection between you and the wet and cold ground, again, if something happens. You can use this to collect water, you can use this to collect food, you can use this to keep sticks and leaves and tinder dry if you have nothing else. So this has a lot of uses in a survival situation as well, just in case you get lost, and it's also extremely useful for foraging. I oftentimes carry a poncho if I know it's going to be raining, otherwise I don't. However, you may want to carry one at all times, and that's just personal opinion. Alright guys, that concludes this video on things that I usually carry when I'm out foraging, and some other things that you might want to think about whenever you go out foraging or setting up your foraging kit. I know this video is a little long, and I apologize for that, but I needed to cover everything here, and in some detail, so I apologize for the length of this video again. However, if you guys want to learn more about edible or medicinal plants, I'd love for you guys to subscribe. If you're new here, feel free to check out the channel. There's all kinds of content here. And I thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something.